Hi guys. I think it's important that I make this particular video just because I don't take the opportunity very often to just be real with folks. I am married legally. I'm separated. I've been separated for over a year. And I have been single for longer than that. So I had been in a relationship for almost 6 years. Married for nearly 3. And here's the thing. I was married to an able-bodied person, and it started out the way it usually does. I thought this person was great. I thought that they were my person. And so I put a lot of faith and a lot of emphasis into this person. They became my entire world. How we met was how many disabled people meet their partners online dating. And I had used OkCupid, and I honestly, I didn't have a lot of luck. And then I saw this really weird guy's profile, and I'm attracted to weird guys, I'm not gonna lie. I'm a big old nerd, so I'm attracted to big old nerds. And he was a big old nerd. Anyway, I saw his profile and I went, we have a lot in common. Okay, I could do this. And he lived a town over from me, which was not that far away. So we got to talking, and I didn't want to meet him right away. But I did want to chat with him a little bit and get to know him a little bit, so that's what we did. See, I am a chair user, and I've been in the wheelchair for my entire life. I come from a family that didn't really teach me disability pride, so I didn't have it naturally. I had to work on that. And one of the spots that I've always felt very vulnerable and uncomfortable with is dating. I have no idea how to talk to guys. I have no idea how to, quote unquote, sell myself. I just do my best, and here we are. And honestly, I'm not a very conceited person, but I am aware of the fact that I am big-chested. Growing up, I was always pretty small girl. And my face isn't bad, so, but it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard for me to get the attention of other people. So when I met this person in person for the very first time, he had a job that kept him on the night shift. So he'd get out of work at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and then I would meet him at a restaurant or whatever was open that late in the area. I'd gone out with him the first night, and we'd gone out to a diner very similar to Denny's. And I was so enthralled, so infatuated. Um, he was very attractive and he was nice and he listened and we talked and talked and talked for hours. I spent hours with him just sitting at the diner and um, getting lost in conversation, which honestly, that doesn't happen very much with me. Um, I'm a talker. I just am. So a lot of times I find that I have conversations with people and they don't know how to keep up the conversation, or they don't know how to they just don't know how to interact with me, and it's frustrating. So for that to happen, I fell for him and I fell hard and very quickly, and I don't regret meeting him. I don't. He taught me a lot about myself and a lot of patience. Oh God, I had to have a lot of patience. I find it particularly difficult to live with another person. And it's always great in the very beginning. It's always great. And then eventually, I find that there are instances or habits or things that perturb me. And I wasn't alone in this. There were things that I did, said that irritated him as well. Um, but but I always felt, for a while, I always felt like I was number one. I always felt like I was the only thing he needed. I felt like I was his best friend. And that's good. Um, that's good in a relationship, but it's only as long as the feelings are genuine. You have to have the same understanding on both sides, and there can be no secrets. No secrets. Even if it's ugly. Problem is, and I want to figure out how to fix it. Unfortunately, there are some things that people don't want to talk about, or they can't, because they know once they say these things, they're immediately going to be the bad person. They're going to be the bad guy. And I get that. Thing is, something horrific happened during the course of us being together, and I was not the same person after. I wasn't. I had I was diagnosed um, probably 4 or 5 years ago. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and depression and just things along those lines. And from what I had described to the therapist, it sounds like it developed when I was in my early teens, which is, pretty standard. But um, these were things that I hadn't dealt with. These are things that I hadn't talked about. And when you go through a really horrific tragedy, you can't bottle it up, because once you do that, that's the biggest mistake you can make. Once you do that, you can't fix anything. Once you go that far, how do you put the pieces together? And I had to navigate that all in the while. I had a partner who was very upset with me at the time. And because of decisions and lack of decisions that I have made, see, I have a tendency to be a very passive person, and it's just what happens happens. But sometimes you just have to make a decision, stick with it. I struggle with that. And that was one of our issues. And that was a big result of this tragedy that I'm not currently comfortable talking about. Perhaps another time, but it was because of this tragedy that a lot of things escalated, and we were never really right after that. So what did we do after and during this tragedy? We decided to get married. Yeah, that was a terrible plan. We decided that the only logical thing would be for us to get married because we were happy, and because of this thing, because of this tragedy, it kind of escalated us into it. The thing is, immediately after we got engaged, and I got really insecure, as I am wont to do. And this is not an excuse. It's not. This is just what happened. Um, I felt really insecure about our relationship, even though we had been engaged for a little bit. And I started to have really paranoid thoughts that he was cheating on me. Like, I couldn't, like, he would come home after working all day. We were living together at this point. He'd come home and he would immediately get on the computer and start playing computer games with his friends and wouldn't really interact with me, wouldn't really talk to me. After coming home and immediately getting on the computer, I wanted to hang out with him. I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to see how his day was. And well, I had been home all day by myself with very little human contact. Because I mean, I did have a handful of friends who I would talk to and hang out with, but for the most part, I was alone. For the most part, I was isolated. And although I had a car, I developed a really bad social anxiety, um, where I, no matter what I did, I could not convince myself to go out and get in the car and drive around and go somewhere. I couldn't convince myself to go anywhere by myself. And that that was an issue. That was one of our problems, was that I eventually became extremely reliant on him um, for interactions, for comfort, for everything. And that codependence was a problem. Um, Now it it got so bad that I could not convince myself to get up and get in the shower, or just eventually go over to class, because I couldn't make it out the front door. That difficult. became difficult because the more he isolated himself from me, the more upset and sad I got, and the worse my social anxiety got. I was constantly convinced that someone was going to break into our apartment and harm me. I, when he would go to work, and he'd have a late night shift, and he'd get off at 11 or something, I would have panic attacks. I would straight up have panic attacks because I don't know if this is something that I manifested myself, but I would hear noises. Might be overactive imagination, I don't know. But that's what would happen, and it would terrify myself. And I would end up texting him and calling him sobbing because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand. My fear was making me irrational, and even though many times it was only an hour until he'd be home, I would be terrified. And he would come home and find me freaked out in a panic attack on the couch if I hadn't already convinced him to come home early. And that certainly caused issues. There's certainly put a strain on things. But eventually I got a job offer. I had applied for a job in another state, the state that I'm currently in, and he told me to go for it and that we would move to this state. And I was so thrilled. I grew up in this state. I've wanted to move back since I moved there when I was 14. So ever since I was 14 years old, I'd wanted to move back. I hated it there. It was too hot, and I don't like being hot. I'd much rather be cold because you can put on as many clothes as you want. So I was excited because my job had to do with disability rights. And shoot, I've been disabled for 31 years. So I just, the year or two leading up to before I'd moved, I'd really gotten into disability rights and learning more about advocating for myself and for others and learning about independent living centers. And so I really wanted to get into the field once I learned about the movement and what it was all about. And so that's what I did. I applied for this job and I got it, and we moved, and I told my boss that I could be there in a month, and that's what we did. And it was one of the more difficult things I've had to do because we'd moved here in June of 2015. And it was by December that I started feeling weird again. End of November, beginning of December, I started getting this feeling again that he was definitely fooling around on me. And I tried really hard to ignore that, but it became all I could think about. So, mind you, there had already been rumors and comments made to me that a new person had started at my husband's job, but this new coworker. that he was spending a lot of time with. A lot of time. And I ignored it, even though it felt like my stomach was eating itself out. I felt sick. I couldn't function, and I couldn't look him in the eye. Turned out that he developed feelings for this coworker, and that was the end of our relationship. What initially happened was this apartment that we had moved into, while mostly accessible, I was having trouble. Um, couldn't insert my medical supplies. I needed help. And like I said, he was an able bodied person. He'd never dealt with a disabled person before, he'd never been around a disabled person before. Although he initially offered to assist me, I fought it. I didn't want him to do it because I was so terrified that he was going to be horrified or grossed out or whatever, and he'd leave. And so I fought him until I realized eventually that I didn't have a solution to my problem and I really needed the help immediately. So I gave in and I said, please, assist me, and we'll figure out a plan. I just need help right now. So he did. I taught him what to do. And I regret it. I regret it. I'm not saying that it's horrible and awkward for other people and their relationships, but because we already had that base of distrust and awkwardness, this was not the person that I should have asked for help. And that should have been my sign altogether that perhaps we should not have been married, although there were many signs before. That was definitely one of them, that the fact that I was so uncomfortable with it. I mean, this is supposed to be my husband, my best friend. So eventually he began to resent the fact that he had to assist me, even though I'd already applied for attendant services and I was just waiting for them to start. I was waiting to find an attendant, and he became so resentful of it. So one day, he picked me up from work. He got me something to eat, McDonald's, I think. We came in, and I went to go turn the TV on like I usually did, and we would watch something until it was time to go to bed. Except that night, he kept his coat on and said he was going out. And I said, okay. When are you coming back? And he handed me my iPad, and he walked out the door. On the iPad was a Dear John letter, and it said that he had been unhappy for some time, and he'd been unhappy with his life, with his job, with everything, and he didn't feel like he could be a good husband to me anymore. He didn't want to be married anymore because, well, he didn't really say why in the letter, but I was devastated. I sobbed. I sobbed for so long. And then I realized that I was trapped in my apartment. I didn't have a car at the time because I sold my car when we moved. I was trapped in my apartment with no way to go to the bathroom. Um, and it was fine at first because I didn't have to go, but eventually I did. And I spent several hours writhing in pain. All the while, I was texting him and trying to call him and to figure out what was going on and why he would just leave like that and what I was supposed to do. How could he just leave when I needed help? I was devastated. And so he was very short with me on the phone. He initially told me he was not coming back to assist me. And eventually he told me that he would be back in the morning to assist me. I was humiliated and devastated. And even though I knew it was going to be a detriment to my health, I was so angry that I didn't want him to come back. I didn't want him to come back just to assist me. And I said that to him. I was so angry that he would abandon me in that way. It's not it's not the same thing as abandoning your able-bodied wife. Using someone's health against them is abuse. It just is. It's a power play and it's abuse. And so I didn't accept that at the time. So what I had to do was I had to call this attendant that I had just heard about. I'd only worked with her maybe once or twice. And so I had to call her and I had to beg her to come over and to help me. And she did. She did. And the next day, I went into my office. I talked to several different departments that work on benefits for SSD, for Medicaid, and consumer directed care so that I could get an attendant. And it was hard. I had to tell my coworkers who I'd gotten to know quite a bit. I had to tell them my story over and over and over again. My husband left. I don't know what to do. I don't want to end up sick and going into the hospital and probably going into a nursing facility. I told my story over and over and over again to different coworkers. Some that I'd known a little while, some that I never really talked to. And it was really awkward, but I did it. So eventually I got set up with attendant services and I had somebody come in, and then throughout this entire mess, I got so depressed. I got so depressed that I did not care if I lived or died. I eventually was able to talk to him. He didn't want to tell me the reason for all of this. He didn't want to tell me because he said it's something you can't help. You're gonna hate me. And I racked my brain. And I said to him, it's because I'm disabled, isn't it? You can't handle that I'm disabled. And he didn't want to answer that. He didn't want to answer it. And then I poked at him and poked at him, and finally he said with a sigh, "You're never going to be able to dance with me." And my heart immediately broke all over again. I wanted to sink into the floor. And I understand now how horrible and evilist that is. But my self-esteem is terrible. And so when he said that, I went, oh, well, yeah. Okay, well, there's that. So my depression grew. I struggled to get in the shower. I struggled to feed myself. And all of a sudden, I was approved for attendant services. And when I had to hire that first person, when she would come over, what I would have her do is I would have her sit in the living room while I took a shower, because that way I knew at least I would do it. Same thing with eating is I put it to her this way. I put it under the guise of, well, if you don't remind me to eat, I'm going to forget because I get really involved in my work. And that's not entirely untrue. I do often forget because I get so into what I'm doing. I do often forget to eat. I haven't talked to him or seen him in a long time. Every once in a while, we'll get mail here. But I just leave it at my job and he comes and gets it. Because he used to work for my job, because his girlfriend works for my job. And the reason I'm telling you all of this and the reason I'm being so gosh darn personal is because I know that there are young women out there or women out there and they think they have found the person of their dreams. And they're going to do everything they can to be less disabled, to be perfect. And they're going to hate themselves when something happens and they need more help. Or the guy just decides that he doesn't want to be there for that person because they can't handle it. I know that there's going to be women out there like that. And I just want you to know it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong.